Do you know, the older I get, the more reflective I become. And this morning, I have a reason to think back on my journey to how I got to be a city council member in Colorado Springs. It's, you know, there's a reason why they call older people wise, and it's because we've experienced a lot, and we all can take some time to look back and learn from the lessons that we had along the way of our own lives. So I want to start this morning and just share a little bit about my story and my life about growing up in Colorado Springs. Do you know, I've always believed that if we, as we have chosen this community to live in, that we all have a responsibility to give back. It just so happens that my position has been more public than others. My heritage runs rich and deep, and so I want to start with my grandfather's family moving to Colorado, 1899. His father was a miner, and they moved the family, 5 boys and his mother, to Cripple Creek. Soon after, my grandfather's father abandoned the family and left the 5 boys and his wife alone in Cripple Creek. So they were there with the 5 boys. My grandfather was the oldest, and the boys began to work in order to support the family. My grandfather worked as in the newspaper business, and he also worked in a bank, but he always had a lifelong love for cars. And there's a great story about how he and some of his friends bought a car, and they tore it down and put it on a train and brought it to Cripple Creek. It was going to be the first car in Cripple Creek. The train arrived, the crowd gathered, they got the car off, they began to put it all together, and they couldn't get the thing to start because of the altitude. And it never did run in Cripple Creek. They had to put it back on the train and bring it back down to Colorado Springs. In the 1920s, my mother was born in Cripple Creek in 1913. She told wonderful stories about life growing up in Cripple Creek, and they lived across the street from the jail when the unions were striking against the miners, and she had some wonderful stories to tell. But in the 1920s, they moved to Colorado Springs, where my grandfather purchased Strang's Bicycle Shop, which was turned into the Buick dealership in Colorado Springs. So he started the car dealership in Colorado Springs in the 1920s, and which stayed in our family for over 50 years. He later went on to be involved in local politics and ran for state senate, where he served as Colorado Springs representative in the Denver Senate. My dad grew up in Deer Trail, Colorado, and he attended Colorado College. This is where my mom and dad met, and they were married in 1935. So my Colorado roots run deep. If you ever see me driving around, you'll notice I have one of those Pioneer license plates on my car. And in order to get one of those, you have to prove your family's been in Colorado for 100 years. And so my sister and I went up to Cripple Creek, found an old phone directory from up there that showed my grandfather's family, and that's how we proved that our family had been in Colorado for 100 years. In 1950, the year I was born, our family moved to 1430 North Nevada Avenue, which became my childhood home. Colorado Springs in the 50s was just a wonderful place to grow up. In 1950, Colorado Springs had 40,000 people. My childhood was literally idyllic. Life growing up here was wonderful. The heart of the town was the old North End, and we lived on Nevada Avenue. In those days, there was no interstate through Colorado Springs, and the main thoroughfare was Nevada Avenue, which was Highway 85-87, running down through the middle of town. It was so busy, the road was, that we didn't even know the kids that lived across the street on Nevada. We were threatened with our lives if we took a step into that roadway. So other than seeing them at school, we never interacted with the people east of Nevada Avenue. We were on the west side of the street. as I say, it was just a wonderful time. It was a wonderful neighborhood. We had lots of kids. We knew all our neighbors, and everyone watched out for each other. We would play all day and all night until the streetlights came on, and that was our sign that it was time to get home. I knew every crack in the sidewalks on Nevada Avenue from roller skating. I knew where you had to avoid and when you had to jump, and it was just a wonderful childhood. I was the youngest of 4 kids. There were 10 years between my oldest brother, and I had 2 brothers and a sister. I attended Steele School, and even today you can still see the remains of an underpass that went under Nevada Avenue. It was the only way we could safely get the kids to school. So we would go down the underpass under Nevada and come up the other side to get to Steele School. I then attended North Junior High, where we walked to school and stopped at the Egg House every day. I don't know if you remember the Egg House. It was right there on North Nevada and was a real hangout for us junior high kids working our way to North Junior High School. My family moved to Friendship Lane up on the Mesa when I was in 8th grade. I finished at North and rode the bus to Palmer High School. In those days, there were only 2 high schools. My first year at Palmer is the year that Mitchell opened. So now we had 3 high schools in Colorado Springs. As far as our family business, my father soon joined my grandfather at Strang's, and it was the best place in town to watch a parade. That's what I always remember. Do any of you remember Strang's Garage? Oh my goodness, it was at the corner of Nevada and Kiowa. It's where the city bus terminal is now. And it was called Strang Garage. In those days, all of the car dealerships were located downtown. That was typical in cities all over the country. The car dealerships were all big places in the middle in the heart of your city. My grandfather died in 1960, and my father began working on plans to move to Motor City. All car dealers were located downtown, and the rent had just become too expensive. This was a big move. In those days, car dealers were all downtown, and there was no such thing as a Motor City. And I remember my dad fretted about that decision. He had just taken over from my grandfather, who had passed away, and he knew it was either the smartest or the dumbest move he would ever make. So we moved the car dealership down to where is now Motor City, and Dad was there for 2 years before any other car dealership decided, oh, maybe this is a good idea. I do remember those years, and they were difficult 2 years, wondering if it would even take off. We changed the name of the dealership at that point, and it was from there forward called Guy Martin Buick. From then on, though, once the other dealers decided to join my father, he was always known as the mayor of Motor City. I was in a car family, and so our kids, all of us, always got new cars when we turned 16. Not new cars, they were used cars, but we got cars when we turned 16. As the youngest, I often watched my brothers and my sister every time they got in trouble. First thing that Mom and Dad did was take their car keys away from them. And I said, this was, I think, really the first sign of that stubborn streak in me. And I said, Mom and Dad, I don't want you to give me a car when I turn 16. I'm going to buy my own. And so I went to work and got a job. Now, I will say my first car was a Buick. I bought a 1950 baby blue Buick. It was a tank for $300. And I made it very clear that it was my car. And if I got in trouble, they couldn't take my car keys. So I always thought that was a real sign of things to come for me. You know, I've often said that I never have met a native of Colorado Springs that I didn't like. Maybe because we all grew up in the same culture. But think about it. It was a wonderful time to grow up in Colorado Springs. And those of us that have chosen to stay here, we all remember that. Do you know, I never really even considered what my future would be. In the late 1960s, it was just assumed that I would go to college and I would get married. What I would study in college, I had 2 choices. Many of you probably remember this. What were our 2 choices? We could be a nurse or we could be a teacher. I chose to become a teacher, never really thinking I would teach. because it was just assumed that I would meet my husband in college, and the only reason I would have a degree is just in case I ever needed it later down the road. I followed my sister up to Greeley, Colorado at the University of Northern Colorado, where I became president of my sorority, where my past has shown me I tend to be always the responsible one and the one taking care of everyone else. Much to my parents' chagrin, I did not meet my husband during my 4 years in college. After college, it was a tough time to decide what to do. There were very few teaching jobs in the early 70s, and most of my friends made the decision to move to Denver, where they could get some teaching jobs. It was hard for me to decide whether to go to Denver or to move to Colorado Springs. I consider that a real fork in my road of life, where this was my home. This is where the people I cared about were here, and I made the decision to return to Colorado Springs. I taught school for about 3 years and realized my interest was really more in the area of business after all those years of growing up in a family business. This was another sign of my stubborn streak. When I was 23 years old, I decided I'd had enough with paying rent. So I decided I was going to buy my own first house, much to my parents' chagrin. Again, they were convinced that I was on a path to get married and have a family, and they couldn't imagine why I would want to have my own house. But I did. I struggled in my 20s trying to figure out what I was going to do. I didn't want to teach, but what could I do? My parents were so worried about me, and I just couldn't seem to find my niche. I remember one Sunday afternoon, I approached my father. He was sitting in our living room in his lounge chair, which was sort of his throne in our house. And I said to him, "Dad, I think I would like to come to work for you in the dealership." I will never forget the laugh that I got. He looked at me and he said, "What in the world would you do? We already have a secretary." I've never held that against my dad. It was a different generation, and that was genuinely what he thought and how he felt. But it once again sort of pushed me out there on my own, and I knew I had to decide. My brothers had a very comfortable life, both working for my father at the dealership, but there was really no place for me. It was at that time that I ran into a friend who was working for a company here in Colorado Springs who had just developed a computer program for bookstores. This was in the early 80s when computers were just getting started. The internet wasn't even around in the early 80s. And I went to that company and I convinced them they needed to hire a teacher to teach people how to use this new computer system. They sold this computer system to bookstores all over the country, and I spent the next 10 years traveling, training people on how to use computers. I actually took to it like a duck to water and began my career in computers. I finally had found my niche. I loved the traveling. I loved working with bookstores. I loved computers. There was many a night during that time that I actually spent time in a hotel room reading a computer manual to try to learn enough to go teach the people the next day, because it really was not my field, but I thoroughly enjoyed those times working there. I decided at that time that because my undergraduate degree was in education, I needed to return to school, and I went back and started work on an MBA in finance and information systems. I always thought the people in the room were smarter than I was, that there was something they knew that I didn't. And all my MBA really taught me was, nope, there's not really much more they knew that I didn't, but now I knew it. And it helped to give me the confidence that I needed to keep moving forward. The 80s were a difficult time for my family. My mother in 1980 suddenly died, went to bed one night and just didn't wake up the next morning. My father, who had been very dependent upon her, really was unable to take care of himself. So I spent my 30s actually taking care of my father. In 1985, my brother was diagnosed with a brain tumor. He was the heir apparent to the family business, and he died in 1986. which led to we had to sell the car dealership after 50 years in our family. My father died in 1989, so the 80s were a very difficult year for our family, and I had basically put my life on hold during that time, taking care of everyone. I was the youngest in the family, I wasn't married, and it was just assumed that Jan will take care of everybody. So it really wasn't until I hit my 40s that for the first time in my life I actually began to think about, what do I want to do? That's when I encountered another important fork in my road. I'm guessing we all can look back to one important decision in our lives that changed everything. The computer company was sold that I worked for and moved to Pittsburgh. They came to me and asked me to move to Pittsburgh and run the new company. Boy, was that a hard decision. This was my home. Everything I cared about was here, but my career was now moving to Pittsburgh. I remember making a decision, literally thinking it through, pros and cons, and made the decision that I was going to stay in Colorado Springs. At the same time I made that decision, I decided that if I was going to stay here, I really wanted to help make this a better place. I love Colorado Springs. My roots run deep here, but I wanted to see Colorado Springs reach its full potential. I literally woke up one morning and decided if I was going to stay here, then I wanted to give back to this community that had been so good to me and my family over the years. I opened the Business Journal that day, and what did I see but an ad for someone to serve on the Pioneers Museum Advisory Board. Well, I figured I'm as close to a pioneer as they have around here. So I filled out the application and soon was serving at the Colorado Springs Pioneers Museum. It's such an interesting journey. During that time, because I had switched jobs, I tried a few jobs, but nothing really stuck. So I decided to take my love of computers and working in business and start my own business. I started Martin Business Group in 1993, and I started working with local businesses and helping them with their computer needs. The internet was on its way, and I wanted to be there. It's amazing how it works once you decide to get involved. While on the museum board, I met someone who suggested I might like to serve on the Ronald McDonald House board. There I began to meet people well connected in the community. One activity, one board, often leads to another. I call it my circles of influence. Before I knew it, I was beginning to find people all over the city, each with their own passions and each with their own reason for caring about Colorado Springs. And those became my circles of influence. Late in 2003, Chuck Murphy and I were approached by the museum director to take a look into the new courthouse the county had just announced on Tejon Street. It would have blocked the view of the museum. It was to be an 8-story courthouse directly across from the museum on Tejon that would have blocked the museum view, but more importantly, we had just installed a statue of Catherine Lee Bates on the grounds of the Pioneers Museum, gazing out over Pikes Peak. This building would have been right in front of Catherine Lee Bates and that view. So the museum director asked Chuck and I if we would go to a county commissioner meeting and just ask if there weren't some other options or some other things that we could consider. Chuck and I went to that meeting that day, and it was the first time I had ever stepped foot into a government building or engaged in local politics. Much to my chagrin, at that meeting that day, Chuck and I were told to sit down and be quiet. I've never been so offended in my life. It is everything that against what I believe government was all about. Chuck and I were so upset when we left that meeting that we made the decision we were going to go and recall those darn county commissioners. So we did. If you all know Chuck Murphy, you know that what a ball of fire he is, and boy, we were upset that day, and so we decided we were going to go recall county commissioners. It was quite an experience. We had over 500 volunteers join us, all protecting Catherine Lee Bates' view of Pikes Peak. I bounced out of bed every morning. I loved working with the public and trying to make a difference in this community at the grassroots level. I think I had found my niche. Although our recall was not successful, today, if you drive by the museum on Tejon, you will notice that there is a 2-story entrance with a 6-story courthouse over on the Cascade side of the street. If you ever walk in the museum, when you step out the front door on the steps, you will see a magnificent view of Pikes Peak. I've often said, and Catherine has had that view ever since we got this done, I've often said that that will really be my legacy for Colorado Springs. It was a wonderful time, and it really showed me my love for grassroots politics and learning how to make a difference in this community. This led to more circles of influence. I met some women along the way who changed my life. Women like Judy Noyes, Mary Lou Makepeace, Marcy Morrison, and my dear friend today, Mary Ellen McNally, all who were such wonderful role models for me. It was 2007 when I decided to finally run for city council. I thought I could make a difference, and that was where the buck stopped in this city. I decided to give it one try. If I didn't win, that was going to be okay, as I was involved in several other activities by then, but I decided I'd give it a try. Oh, how naive I was. After we sent out a press release, my phone immediately began ringing. It was the press, calling to say to me, "Who are you? What do you stand for?" And I remember saying to this first gentleman on the phone, "I'm tied up in a meeting right now. I'm going to have to get back to you on that." It was the beginning of 8 years of a career of working with the press and the city. During that year, there were 9 people running for 3 seats for office. I was the only woman. 3 of the people running were incumbents and likely winners of the race. It was an uphill battle. I didn't receive a single endorsement, which meant no money. We decided, my campaign manager and I, to use my computer skills, and we began to put together a campaign based on the internet. I began to write a blog, and we sent out a weekly newsletter that really began to catch on with people, even though the internet was still not in everyone's home. At the end of that, during that campaign, there was a forum that I attended. It was at El Pomar, and it had about 200 people. It was my first time to get up and really speak in public. And I'll never forget sitting on that platform that night with 8 men and myself, looking out into this crowd of 200 people, thinking, what in the world have I gotten myself into? Not only am I going to get up and speak, but I'm going to talk about politics, for goodness sakes. I did, and when I sat back down, I remember saying to myself, you know what? That wasn't so bad, and I think I can really do this. I went on to win that election with the most votes of all the candidates. I attributed that win to my circles of influence. I've often said to people, if you live in town long enough, you meet enough people, you too can be elected to city council. My grandfather in his time as state senator did influence me, but I didn't run for office because of partisan politics, and I will never vote based on ideology. I ran for only one reason, and that was to help make Colorado Springs all that it could be. I was reelected for a second term in 2011, and once again by more than 10,000 votes ahead of my closest competitor. Yes, I had found my niche in life. Some days people think I'm the greatest, and other days they think I'm the worst. At first it was quite flattering when people would come up to me and treat me like a queen. Wow, I thought, this is really special. But before I knew it, I would say or do something, and those same people would suddenly think I was the devil. For someone who wanted to please everyone, I soon learned that it just wasn't going to be possible. I've learned to take it all in stride. The accolades and the demeaning articles are all just part of this job. I just work hard. I get up every morning and I say to myself, I'm going to go do the best I can for this city today, and I always hope it's good enough. My time in office hasn't been the opportunity I had hoped to lead this community to a more prosperous future. In 2008, soon after my election, this city experienced the worst economic downturn in my lifetime. It took everything we had just to keep the city running. We made the decision to put our resources into public safety rather than parks, which proved to be very unpopular and resulted in an election in 2011 to change our form of government to the new strong mayor. And as soon as I began my second term, we now had a new form of government, a new mayor, and 6 brand new council members who had replaced decades of experience of former council members. It has proven to be more difficult than anyone anticipated to switch to this new form of government. From council's perspective, you add to the mix the fact that we've now elected 12 new council members in the last 2 years. And it's been very difficult for council to find its footing with all of the lack of experience under this new form of government. I so look forward to the day when council again settles back down, gains some experience, and can more clearly identify our role, and then go do it very well. The latest council will be in office for at least 4 years. The first 6 were all replaced within 2 years. Now the terms will run for a full 4 years. So they will be here for 4 years, and I'm very hopeful as they gain some experience, it will again help us to begin to sort this out. It's been quite the journey. I've met some of the most amazing people along the way. I've watched our city struggle again to regain its footing after this difficult downturn. But I truly believe, although it's taken longer than we had hoped, we are once again stepping up to this precipice of greatness that we so often stand at and deciding how to step off. I have one more important decision left on my road of life, and that will come in 1.5 years when I'm term limited from City Council. I don't know yet what that work will look like or what options I will have, but I am watching and I'm waiting and I'm anxious to see where it will lead me. What will my next adventure look like? I do think I have one left in me, just one, but I think I've got one left. I wanted to end today by talking more about our community and how everyone who chooses to make Colorado Springs their home can make a difference. I'm really no different than any of you here today. Maybe one difference is I woke up one morning and decided I wanted to give back to this community that had been so good to me and my family for so many years. My journey took me in ways I never anticipated. If you were to wake up tomorrow morning and ask yourself, what can I do for the community today? And say, why, I really want to get back also. How might that change your life and our community? I know that this would change our community. I promise you, you don't have to run for public office to make a difference. It can be as simple as volunteering for a pillar, or just paying forward that cup of coffee at Starbucks next time you buy one. Just think how much our community would benefit if we each woke up every morning and asked ourselves, what can I do for Colorado Springs today? During our recent summer tragedies, we saw the absolute heart and soul of our community, and it is good. People in Colorado Springs have generous hearts and care about our city. Just think for a moment how we can transform our community if we lived like we did during those tragedies, caring for each other, caring for those in need, and offering assistance any way we could. Colorado Springs would be transformed. Colorado Springs really is, in my opinion, the best place in this country to live. We are lucky to be here and to be a part of it, and we owe it to the community to make sure it's even better for the next generation. Thanks, everybody, and I want to take some questions too.